This shimmering wonder is the Gamesir T4 Kaleid. It's a wired gamepad that works with Switch, PC, and Android. Now this is the same Gamesir that created various clip-on controllers, such as the Gamesir X2. I wasn't particularly impressed with that gamepad or its successors, the X3 and X2 Pro. So I wonder if Gamesir has what it takes to impress me this time around. Well, spoilers, yes. Yes they do. Because this might just be the best gamepad I've ever used. Let's get to it. Hello and welcome to Retro Breeze. I want to say a big thank you to Gamesir for sending me this controller to review. As always, they're not seeing this video before it goes live and all the opinions herein are my own. So from my very first impressions, this controller has a very unique aesthetic. It's made entirely of crystal clear plastic in the central section, which seamlessly becomes frosted towards the grips and around the back side. The plastic is very smooth on the face, but subtly grippy on the grips. The back of the grips have a dotted texture that looks and feels incredibly premium. Right out of the gate, this controller looks absolutely stunning. The design is like nothing I've ever seen before, with this crystal plastic and the incredibly smart black and gold PCB, adorned with the Gamesir typeface showing through. It is easily the best looking controller I've ever had the pleasure of using. And despite the striking transparent design, it also looks very smart and tidy, unlike other see-through gamepads which can tend to look a little bit messy. I absolutely cannot state how amazing this thing looks, seriously. In person, it's just incredible. So, other than its very pleasing aesthetic, what makes the T4 Kaleid so special? Well, first of all, it's this. When the T4 is plugged in, its name, Kaleid, suddenly becomes understandable, with these massive kaleidoscopic RGB lights along the edges. Despite the huge size of these light bars, they're cleverly gated by plastic, which prevents the light from bleeding into the center of the controller, whilst completely illuminating the edges, the grips, and the back. It really is a psychedelic sight to behold. The RGBs smoothly cycle through colorful patterns, and the brightness and saturation is really striking. If you like RGB, I can tell you right now that you are going to love this controller. And the lights are completely customizable too, including the brightness, and the ability to disable them entirely. On board there are some patterns, like a mode that fades through different colors, and a switch-like mode that matches the iconic Joy-Con colors too. Now you can customize these lights further through a software application, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. The T4's other claim to fame is in its magnetism. That's right, I'm talking about Hall sensors. Both analog sticks and the L2 R2 triggers use magnetic Hall sensors, which theoretically means that they have a much longer lifespan and are resistant to the much feared and arguably overblown stick drift issue, made famous by mid-2000s off-brand gamepads and Nintendo Joy-Cons alike. However, something worth mentioning here is that every component on the T4 has been built from the ground up by Gamesir. There's no generic sticks or sensors to be found here at all. It's all proprietary and brand new. The T4 also boasts a gyroscope for motion control, dual rumble motors which you can see through the grips, programmable paddle buttons, programmable macros, audio pass-through, and a positively unreasonable amount of customization, from button mapping to sensor sensitivity to light patterns, all through the Gamesir app, which we'll get to a little bit later in this review. For now though, the most important part of this controller is of course its controls, so let's go over them first. It would be a shame if all those fantastic features were wasted on poor controls, wouldn't it? Thankfully, the T4 comes through with flying colors. Pun entirely intended. That's in part due to its final distinguishing feature, the face buttons. These have a glossy texture and an incredibly unique feeling. They have a light, almost mouse-like clicky switch. However, they're bottomed out with rubber pads. What you end up with is a very quiet, snappy, responsive click that is also soft with a kind of squishy press. It's really hard to describe, to be honest, but I suppose soft click describes it well. And boy oh boy, these face buttons have simply ruined all others for me. These switches are absolutely the best I've ever used. They have all the best parts of a soft membrane button and a clicky switch. You get an ultra-responsive tactile click without the loudness and hard bottoming out of a dome switch, and you get something of the softness of a membrane without the long travel distance or bounciness. They are literally absolutely perfect, and I no longer want to use any other kind of face button. These are by far the best I've ever used. Gamesir absolutely knocked it out of the park with these. I'm absolutely obsessed with them. And in practical use, they're extremely responsive and very easy to tap quickly. The lack of any real travel here is a blessing when you need super fast inputs. Well, rather than gushing on these all day, I'll move on to the D-pad, which is much more standard. It's made from a smooth, not glossy material, and uses clicky dome switches. In terms of feel, it's pretty similar to a PS Vita D-pad, which is also found on the Odin, Retroid Pocket 3, and Loki. It has a gentle bowl shape and is flared in each direction. It's a perfectly good D-pad in every way, and as a fan of clicky D-pads, I have no complaints here whatsoever. The analog sticks are Hall sensor based, which means that they should theoretically last a long time and won't develop any drift. I won't go into whether these Hall based sticks are snake oil or not in this video, but suffice to say these are incredibly smooth and well tensioned sticks, with just about a slight heft to them. They don't feel light or cheap, and are also not too heavy to push around. The cap is very grippy with a nice texture, and more importantly, they are incredibly accurate. The sticks just have a very tuned feeling overall, and they can also be customized exactly to your specifications in the Gamesir app. The home button has a soft membrane press, whereas start, select, mode, and the screenshot button are simple clicky switches. L1 and R1 are also clicky, but with a muted feeling, and these have a kind of soft touch plastic which is super comfortable. The shape of them is excellent too, and once again I have absolutely no complaints, these are absolutely great. The L2 and R2 triggers also use Hall effect magnetic sensors, and have a satisfying heft, much like the analog sticks. They're heavy enough to stay put if you want to rest your fingers on them, but they're easy to push down on all the same. And once again, Gamesir has given me one of the best inputs I've ever used. These are without a doubt the smoothest triggers I've ever used. They almost feel like they're floating when you push down on them, with absolutely no friction, no resistance, and no noise whatsoever. I'm really curious about the design of these because it is absolutely flawless. The triggers themselves are compact with a nice upward flare and a very dotted, grippy texture. These are seriously just another highlight of the T4 Kaleid for me, and they take the crown for easily the best triggers I've ever used, bar none. The sensitivity of them is absolutely amazing, and we'll check that out yet again in the software section. By the way, also up top you'll find the USB-C port. Now this is a wired controller, not wireless at all, and it comes with a 2-meter USB-C to USB-A cable in the box. The interface on the controller is well designed, but there's a good point and a not so good point here. It's good because the port is recessed and has built-in strain relief. This is important because if you're swinging this thing around in Mario Kart using the gyro, you don't want the cable or the port being yanked on. This design means that the stress is about halfway up the thick rubber shielding on the USB-C cable, rather than on the flexible part of the cable or on the port of the controller itself, which means that the USB-C port and the cable will last a long time and there's no danger of ripping or snapping it out. It's not so good though because no other cable I own, even the most compact one I could find, will fit in this controller. And as far as I can tell, looking over their website for a while, Gamesir doesn't sell longer or shorter cables either, or even just a replacement for this one. Personally, I think the included cable is too short and should be much longer, because even for my unusual setup, it has been a real stretch to go from my PC or Switch to the couch on many occasions. And I think that for a normal sized living room and the normal distance a couch would be from the TV, the cable included is just too short. I think it should be 3 or 4 meters, definitely not just 2. I do think you could probably find a compatible cable, but you'd have to try a few first. And then finding a cable that's the right size at the right length as well is just another layer of complexity. And I also don't think it would ever have the same perfect strain protection that this one has. Maybe this isn't a criticism of the controller itself, but more a suggestion that Gamesir should sell longer, shorter, and replacement cables. By the way, just really quick, the cable itself is lovely, with quality hard rubber and a thick braided wire. It's also emblazoned with the Gamesir chicken, which I always appreciate seeing. Anyway, the final inputs on the T4 are the paddles, and these are kinda outliers, because unlike the rest, these are very loud with a hard, snappy micro switch mechanism. Everything else on this controller has a quiet click, but these are much louder than everything else. That's okay though, it's not an unpleasant sound and it hasn't bothered me even once. I actually only noticed it when I was tapping all the buttons to write this review. More importantly, they have the same soft plastic as the shoulders and are shaped perfectly to rest under the middle fingers when you're holding the controller. Overall, the Kaleid is very, very comfortable. The combination of the high quality plastic, whether it's the glassy front or grippy back, and the tried and true Xbox shape, work together with the well-designed shoulders and triggers to make this a very easy to hold controller. And it's also pretty light as well. And when you match all that up with the truly, truly excellent inputs, I want to tell you already at this point in this review that this is one of the best gamepads I have ever laid my hands on. But could it be the best controller? Well, believe it or not, we've only scratched the surface so far, so let's find out. In-game, the T4 gives you absolutely everything you could ask for in a controller. In general, all of the inputs are responsive, comfortable, and the whole feel of the controller is just really satisfying. For retro gaming, the clicky D-pad works perfectly for fighting game combos. Fireballs are thrown with ease. For snappy platforming, it works just as well. There is a little cardinal tilt on the D-pad, which means that I can hold one direction and tilt the D-pad to activate the perpendicular directions. However, it never really gets in the way, even in games like DuckTales where it's usually very noticeable. In Crash Bandicoot, when you have a D-pad that has bad cardinal tilt, Crash will tend to move diagonally, as well as moving forward when you hold the up button on the D-pad. But in this case it only happens when I actually tilt it intentionally, and I can even feel the click under my thumb when this happens, so it's easy to avoid. So overall I'd say this D-pad is really top tier for retro gaming. And of course the quick responsive face buttons are excellent too. And I was easily able to pull off my favorite Yoshimitsu combo in Tekken 3, which requires very quick tapping of these buttons. When it comes to modern games though, that's where the T4 truly shines. Again, pun entirely intended. First of all, the analog sticks are incredibly smooth and responsive. I always like to test this in Sonic Frontiers where you can run in really tight circles, and there's not really any limit on this, so if you have a really precise analog stick you'll be able to run tighter circles. And I can do just that with the T4 Kaleid. And of course those analog shoulders come into play as well. And I mostly like to test these in rally games, in which you need precise control of the throttle and brakes. And once again it's just an incredible experience on the T4. The shape of the triggers is super comfortable, and they're so light and smooth and responsive that you get absolutely perfect control. The gyroscope is another area that works absolutely perfectly. And I'm not a very accurate person when it comes to gyroscopes, but I would say that this is one of the easiest to control I've tried yet. Whether it's for aiming or steering, I had absolutely no issues with the T4. So overall, in-game, even just out of the box, the T4 Kaleid is absolutely stellar in pretty much every way. It's got a really good D-pad, it's got absolutely fantastic face buttons, the triggers and the shoulders are absolutely perfect, and the gyroscope works well too. Also, the rumble works pretty nice too. It's not HD rumble or haptic feedback, it is just more of a basic rumble, but there are 5 different levels of strength, including completely disabling them, and it always feels pretty pleasant. It's not too loud and it's not too heavy. Once again, it just kinda has a tuned feeling, just like the rest of the controller. Another handy feature of the T4 is audio pass-through. And with the controller connected to your device, you can plug some headphones into the bottom and listen to your audio through there. Now I'm hesitant to criticize this too heavily, because I think overall it's just a really nice feature to have. Especially if you're playing a game in a noisy environment and you need some headphones, or you don't want your audio to bother somebody else, it's just pretty nice to have. However, based on my tests, you do lose quite a lot of bass and punchiness of the audio. Nowhere near to an extent where it makes this feature unusable at all, it's still perfectly usable. But when I was just testing this with music, I definitely noticed a lack of bass and just overall fidelity when I was listening to music through the controller versus directly plugged into my PC. But despite that, I'm just really glad this feature is here because I might use it one day. If it wasn't there, I would never be able to use it. It's here, so maybe I can. If it's a feature you rely on all the time and you're really picky about audio quality, you might find this feature underwhelming. But for me, I just think it's a cool extra. Take a listen to these 2 recordings. The first one is from the Gamesir controller and the second is directly from my PC. Let me know in the comments below if you notice a difference. So now I want to talk about the customizability of this controller, because it is extensive. Without even touching the Gamesir application on PC, you have a few things that you can do on the controller itself. For example, you can change the mode between Switch, PC, and direct input for Android. You can change the brightness of the LEDs and their pattern. You can change the rumble strength, you can switch the triggers between analog and hair trigger mode, you can turn on a turbo function, you can switch the face buttons between an Xbox and a Nintendo style layout, and you can program the back paddles as either single button or combo macros. You can have up to 12 buttons in a macro, and it includes the D-pad, start, select, the face buttons, L1, R1, and the analog inputs like the triggers and analog sticks. And finally, you can totally recalibrate the sticks and the analog triggers directly on the controller as well. But if you want to take your customization to the moon and back, you're going to want to download the Gamesir program for Windows. And unfortunately, this is only available for Windows. If you know anything about me, you know I wish that there was a Linux app, but more than that, I kind of wish there was an Android app too, but for now it's only available on Windows. And here it is, the Gamesir T4 app. That's right, this is exclusively for this controller, and it is incredibly well made and easy to use. Let's go over a few of the features that are available. From the main screen of the app, you'll be able to enter the profile section, which we'll look at in a second, vibrate the controller so you know where it is, and which one is connected if you have multiple, and also apply firmware updates to the controller. When you enter into the profile section, you're going to see 4 profiles. Default is one that you cannot edit, and it's basically what you get out of the box with the T4. And clicking any other profile will instantly sync it to the controller. You can also add a description for a profile, for example if you make one for a specific game, and then you can click the configure button to start setting it up. By the way, I want to note at this point, this entire app can be controlled using the controller itself, which I have to say is just a really nice detail, and it works really well. The first page of the software is the button mapping, and here you can remap any button to any other button. There is no restrictions here whatsoever. The second menu will let you customize the analog sticks, and there is a ton to do here. First of all, you can adjust the initial and maximum values. For the initial value, this is how much you need to push the stick before the stick begins to actuate. And reducing the maximum value will reduce the overall range of the stick, meaning that when you push it all the way, it might just push 50%. You can test these values in real time by adjusting the bar and then moving the stick and observing the circular graph. You can seriously fine-tune these down to a real hair, it's absolutely incredible. And if you set the initial value to 0, it's so sensitive that you're probably going to start picking up ghost values of around 1 to 2%. And that sounds like a bad thing as I say it, but it's really not. It just means that you can customize these really down to the finest detail. You can also set the left stick and the D-pad to be swapped permanently. So in games that only have D-pad support and not analog stick, you can use the analog stick for those and vice versa. You can also use a diagonal lock, which means that when you're using the analog stick, you'll only get up, down, left and right instead of the diagonals as well. I think this feature is more fun when I consider that I can use the D-pad instead of the analog stick in games that usually don't support the D-pad. I just really like that. The next page is for customizing the triggers, and my goodness, just look how sensitive these triggers can be. Again, you can set the initial and the maximum value, or you can set them to hair triggers. But by setting the maximum value lower, you can achieve effects such as a half push going all the way to max. And if you set the initial value higher, you get more wiggle room to hold your fingers on the triggers without them actuating. Seriously, this customization goes so deep, it's amazing. And I love being able to observe it all in real time in the app. On the next page, you have the vibration, and you can independently set the left and the right motors. Why you might want to do that, I'm not sure, but you can do it right here. The next page is for customizing the RGB lights, and this goes so deep it's absolutely crazy. There are a selection of presets that you can use, and there's also an audio reactive mode. And the audio reactive mode is really cool because it actually reacts to audio through the USB, which means if there's some really fast-paced heavy music playing, you're going to see that reflected in the lights flashing on the controller. A pretty nice little touch. But if you want to go further than that, you can customize 5 different lights, the bottom and the top of both light bars, and the home button that has the mighty chicken on it. And you can set these to basically any color you want. And the controls are really handy because they give you an easy way to copy and paste values over to different lights. But it goes even deeper with that because you can have up to 8 keyframes, which means that you can create your own animations. For example, if you want some kind of synthwavy effect where it glows from blue to purple, you can set this up and animate it yourself. You can even throw in a bright yellow in there for some reason if you want to as well. The possibilities are pretty much endless here. And once again, you can watch all this happening in real time on your controller and tune it to exactly where you want it. Oh, and by the way, you can customize 4 different light profiles at once on the controller. And then you can use the onboard controls to flip between those at will. Honestly, the amount of customization you can do here is just unbelievable. And I also really like that you can disable the lights after a minute, 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, or whatever you want. and have them activate again where you pick up the controller. This way you can leave it plugged in without it shining out when you're not using it. And the final tab on the customization software is the gyroscope. And you actually get more customization with the gyroscope than you even do with the analog sticks. You can customize the control curve and the sensitivity of it, as well as deactivating or activating different axes. And it also gives you the option to set the gyroscope to work by tilting the controller back and forth or side to side. And finally, my absolute favorite feature of the gyroscope is that you can set it to always be on, always be off, or to activate when you hold any other button on the controller. And this is an excellent feature, especially for shooting games. For example, I've been playing Vanquish lately, which is a game you should totally play if you haven't already.
You know, I think that shock treatment actually fixed my back problems.
Bet you can get one of those things on eBay.
But I really love to be able to fine-tune my aim using the gyroscope. And so in this case, I've set the gyroscope to become active when I hold down L2, which is the aiming button. And now I get all the benefits of gyroscope aiming in a game that wouldn't usually support it. And it's important to note that this is configured on the controller itself, not any specific software or any specific game. So you could even implement gyroscope controls into an emulator, for example. And I think that's just amazing. You can do this for absolutely any button on the controller. On the Nintendo Switch, many games support the gyroscope by default, for example Zelda. But on Steam and on PC, a lot of games don't. But with the Kaleid, you can make those games support the gyroscope. And all you need to do is to map one of the buttons to activate it, and then set it whether you want it to be on steering mode, which is the left stick, or aiming mode, which is the right stick. And with that you have universal gyroscope aiming or steering support in any game you want. This is a fantastic feature and one that I've only ever seen on the Steam controller and the Steam Deck. It really is excellent and just so easy to set up. So that was a lengthy overview of the customization software because I really want to show you what is possible with the T4 Kaleid. Now I've been at this video for way longer than I thought I would be. Actually, just between you and me, I told Gamesir that I would give them around an 8-minute review of this controller. But I love it so much and I've gotten so much out of it that I just wanted to go into a huge amount of detail in this video. But eventually I know I need to wrap up and give you my summary. So here I am with my likes, dislikes, and my final opinions on the Gamesir T4 Kaleid. And I'm actually going to start here with my summary, because I think it's important. The Gamesir T4 Kaleid is far and away, in every single possible manner, the best gamepad I've ever used for the Switch, for the PC, and for Android. I absolutely love everything about it, with a few exceptions. But overall, I want to tell you that if you were looking for a wired controller, this is by far the one to get. And that's even before you consider that this thing is just a mere $40. This is cheaper than any other mainstream gamepad that you can get right now. It's also cheaper than my gully kit King Kong 2, and it competes directly with 8-bit Dough. But the T4 Kaleid is better than all of those in my opinion. From its excellent controls, its unique face buttons, its unlimited customizability, and its really nice aesthetic, the T4 Kaleid is just excellent. So anyway, let me give you my likes now. My biggest like, of course, is these face buttons. They are better than any other controller I've ever used. I also like the tuned feeling of the analog sticks and the analog triggers. It seems like a lot of work was put into making these feel perfect. And when it comes to the triggers specifically, these are the smoothest and most comfortable triggers I've ever used. I like the plastic they used. Whether it's the crystal plastic on the front, the more frosted plastic, or the dotted grippy plastic on the back, everything is just really good quality. And I like that it works with pretty much any device. Switch, PC, Android, it all works. Of course, I like the massive amount of customization you get, and I like the bonus features like the pretty good vibration and the audio pass-through, which I might actually use now and again. And of course, I have to mention the excellent gyroscope implementation on this controller. I love how it basically gives you universal gyroscope support for any game on any system. It's really excellent. Now for my dislikes. And really, I'm just gonna say one here. And this isn't a flaw with a controller, it's just a dislike of mine, and that is, it's wired. Now I know this is a wired controller, so I'm not holding it against this controller specifically, but for me personally, I'm just not really in an environment or a situation where a wired controller is always viable. If at any point I am in the situation where I can plug this in, for example if I'm sitting at my desk or I'm using a tablet or something like that, I will always reach for this controller. But just by virtue of the fact that it's not wireless, I don't use it as much as I otherwise would. When I'm sitting on the couch playing a game, I'm probably not using this controller, just because it's quite a stretch to get that cable all the way from my PC to my couch, or my games console to my couch. So yeah, it's not a flaw, it's just something that It's not perfectly matched to my use case. But once again, this is a wired controller, and if you're looking for a wired controller, there is nothing else I would recommend. And I don't think there will be another controller I'd recommend for a very, very long time after this. I really hope that Gamesir come through and make a T4 Kaleid wireless edition, and if they do, I will be the first in line to buy it. And in fact, if they did do that, I would get rid of every single other wireless controller I have and replace them all with the T4 Kaleid. It is that good, and I recommend it that much. That's it for this one. Thanks again to Gamesir for sending me this controller to review. Let me know what you think about it in the comment box below, and also make sure to check the description for a link where you can buy this controller for yourself. And I highly recommend doing so if you're in the market for a wired controller. This has been Shem from RetroBreeze, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.